Welcome back. We begin now on our video series on Roman history. If you have found at times the series on Greek history rather daunting, you'll be pleased to know that there's much less about Roman history that you need to know for the purpose of this course, because we're only covering a relatively narrow period in Roman history, and also the authors that we're studying are not as involved with history as the Greek ones were. So it'll be relatively light. What I will be focusing somewhat more on in these concluding videos on the history series will be more the developments of Roman literature. In addition to Roman comedy, we also have to touch a little bit on Roman satire and novel, which are different developments of the comic satiric spirit that are essentially offshoots of Greek Old Comedy, but they go in quite a different direction. So you'll see that coming up in future videos. Just to give you a very quick overview of the history as we understand it, so that you can put our two authors, Plautus and Terence, in their proper context. Roman history divides up into three large blocks, and I will only cover them very briefly here. The King period traditionally starts from 753 BC, which is the foundation of Rome, down to 510 BC, which is traditionally the foundation of the Republic. It's important to understand that for reasons I will not take time to explain fully here, neither of these dates is really particularly secure, especially this one, because archaeological remains of Rome seem to indicate that Rome itself probably existed well before 753 BC, and quite a bit of what formed the foundation of Roman government and civilization long post-date 753 BC. And 510 BC is a little suspicious because it seems to correspond rather oddly closely with the foundation of democracy in Athens. So we're not totally sure about that date either. But in any event, it was clear that the Romans, as they understood their history, were ruled by kings. The Romans eventually didn't like the kings very much. They were their Latin term was reges, and the word rex, the singular for king, like Tyrannosaurus rex, became a rather bad word. Basically, being a king was bad because a king was monarchical and was therefore contrary to the political ideology that the Romans wanted to press for the basis of their republic. Anybody who might look like he might be ambitious enough to try to become king would obviously be looked at with great suspicion. There is the famous scene in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar describing how Mark Antony offered 3 times out in a public event a crown for becoming king to Caesar, and he denied it, but apparently denied it with increasing reluctance each time. And we know where that went, 44 BC, in that play. All right, so the kingship comes to an end in 510 BC, and the historians are consistent in describing the fall of the kingship in pretty drastic terms. It has to do with the final of what were supposed to be 7 kings of Rome, a man named Tarquin, who is given the moniker Superbus, which in Latin means haughty. He thinks he's superb. He's not actually. He was also not a Roman king, in fact. He was Etruscan. And he was the third of 3 Etruscan kings who held command over Rome. His son, named Sextus, raped a woman named Lucretia in her house while he was guest in the house of her husband named Collatinus, one of the top generals in the Roman army at that time. There had been some movement even before that incident happened, potentially to do away with the kingship. And Collatinus himself was close friends with another man, ironically named Lucius Junius Brutus. And yes, that man is an ancestor of the more famous Marcus Junius Brutus, one of the assassins of Julius Caesar, as you saw in Shakespeare. So the kingship comes to an end because the son of the king, Sextus Tarquinius, his full name is, rapes this woman Lucretia. Again, she is the wife of Collatinus, the general, and she is a predominantly chaste woman. She kills herself because of the shame of having submitted to the rape, whereupon the revolution gets underway. spurred on by both Collatinus and this other man Brutus, who had been sort of waiting in the wings for a while, and eventually the kingship falls. The kingship itself, incidentally, also got off to a rather rocky start, and I mention it here because it has some influence on what goes on with the Republic. So you probably remember the two twins, Romulus and Remus. You may also be aware that only Romulus was around to actually be king. There is a reason for that, if you do not already know the story. So Romulus and Remus, according to the Roman myth, were two twin babies who were tossed into a river in a basket to drown, but actually ended up surviving, rather similarly to Moses. That happened because their great uncle had taken away the command of the colony, Lavinium, from, Alba Longa, from his brother. So the one who committed the crime was Amulius. The one who lost the rule was Numitor, the grandfather of these two boys. So we have a bit of mythology here about the god Mars, who makes his way to the daughter of Numitor, who has been forced to become a Vestal virgin so that she will remain celibate and thereby will never give birth to anybody who might be an avenger against Amulius. Well, Mars takes care of that, as gods have a tendency to do. And so as a result, two boys are born, and when Amulius finds out about them, off they go to the river. But they survive. They are raised by a she-wolf, they are fed by a woodpecker, and they are raised by a shepherd named Faustulus. Once they grow up, many years later, Remus goes into a neighbor's land and steals some sheep. When he is taken into custody, he learns and ends up learning the entire story. It turns out that this is Numitor's land. He ends up learning the entire story of what happened to his grandfather, and he and Romulus team up together to defeat Amulius and restore Numitor. So far, all is well. Now the two of them, according to the historian Livy, hit upon the idea of building a city in order to celebrate their newfound success and power. They build the city, but they get into a dispute about exactly who is going to rule the city first. So each one heads to one of the 7 hills of eventually Rome at the time in order to check on vultures. So each one is going to look for vultures. Each one comes back. One of them says, I saw 6. The second one comes back and says, I saw 12. Well, I saw mine first, but I saw more. The two of them start fighting. Now, when Romulus designed the city, he drew this line around the city that in Latin is called the Pomerium. And that was supposed to mark the sacred district around the city. Remus, in fury at his brother Romulus, went to that line and jumped over it. That was an insult, and Romulus cut down Remus. So the foundation of Rome is based on a fratricide, as the ode by Horace, epode number 16, describes quite acidly. It's one of his most satirical epodes that we have. Horace was the lyric poet who wrote just at the very beginning of the time of the Empire, and he had some unfortunate things to say about this fratricide that starts the city of Rome off. So you could see there's a lot of violence associated with these kings. However, the kingship period is ascribed with many of the institutions that will form the foundation of the Republic, most notably the Senate. Romulus needed a council of elder advisors around him once he was king, and so he chose 100 of them who became his group of advisors. They became the Senate because they were elders, that's what the word means, and eventually that became the foundation of the institution in the Republic known to us now today as the Senate. Okay, so the kingship period concludes with the fall of Tarquin in 510 BC. The Republic period continues from 590 BC down to 31 BC, and it's distinguished by being ruled by 2 consuls who are the top officials. Collatinus and Lucius Junius Brutus were the first 2 consuls, and then thereafter 2 consuls were elected each year, and the years were usually named after them. So the Republic put a great deal of stress on running the state of Rome under the force of law. In the 450s BC, the first code of laws called the 12 Tables was published. It's very simplistic, but still is well documented as to what laws were in place. And then there were quite a few subsequent laws passed as well. So the Republic period goes reasonably consistently from 509 BC down to 31 BC. There was a great deal of trouble with the Republic in the last century, which I cover in a different course. But eventually, 31 BC is the Battle of Actium that involves the adopted son of Caesar, named Octavian, and the general of Caesar, Mark Antony. The two of them finally battle in 31 BC, and Octavian emerges the winner. Octavian will eventually go on to become the first emperor in the new empire, which begins in 31 BC. And 4 years after this, Octavian receives from the Senate the title of Augustus, or Revered One, that celebrates his success at restoring the Republic after a terrible period of crises. Okay, in our next video, we will look a little bit more specifically at the Republican period so that we can understand how Roman comedy came to be formed. We'll see you next video.